What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Today's show devoted exclusively to the Champions League. Going to go in reverse chronological order, starting with Wednesday's games, then going back to Tuesday's. There is a lot to get to here, a lot of bigger picture things to discuss. So I'm going to jump right in, of course, with what happened in Germany. Bayern Munich 2, PSG 0. Before I even get into this game and all of the things that come with it, I would like to start by saying that PSG did not get unlucky with this draw. PSG failed to win their Champions League group. I don't think we can make a big enough deal about this idea, this fact, that Benfica won that group. And you go look at the consequences of that, and PSG draw Bayern, and they could have drawn City, they could have drawn Real Madrid, they could have drawn whoever you want to throw in there. They drew Bayern, and Benfica got the benefit of the worst team left in the round of 16 because they won their group. The team who got the unfortunate draw here was Bayern. Bayern have not lost a Champions League game this season. Bayern have been the best team in the Champions League this season. At least you can make the argument, and I will certainly make that case. Right? Inter, Barcelona, that's 4 of your group stage games, and now PSG, just to get to the quarterfinals. And Bayern still took care of business and did so rather emphatically. So the game itself. You didn't see the same pressing from Bayern the way that they did in the first leg, which was a lot of what I talked about after that game, was the idea that PSG just couldn't get the ball up the field, couldn't get it to the attacking players. And they still had that issue for different reasons in this game. It had to do a lot more with clogging the midfield. But Bayern, didn't threaten all that much in the first half. Because you have that goal from the first leg, you can play more conservatively and make PSG come and beat you. Which PSG nearly did. You get the press going. Don't know exactly what Jan Sommer was doing, but you poke the ball off him. It ends up at Vitinha's feet. And yeah, he's got to do better. That was also a terrific play by Matthias de Ligt. Matthias de Ligt had a sensational game, as did Alphonso Davies, with what they did defensively. And Davies, obviously, what he gives you going forward, but he was really good. He came up with a couple key blocks in this game, too. That was the opportunity to really turn this thing around. You score that goal, it's a brand new game. You've got some confidence. Bayern haven't looked like they're going to give you that much trouble. Instead, de Ligt gets to celebrate that terrific play. You have to continue to press and feel that pressure. Bayern then soak up pressure, and eventually, one of the few moments you did see the high press work. Verratti gets caught on the ball. There's your goal. Get a second one late. And that's that. Really, where PSG lost this is that first leg. Not being able to get that goal. And you could argue also the Vitinha chance. They created these opportunities and they didn't take any of them, which allowed this to be played on Bayern's terms. And I don't care who you are, in that stadium against that team, you're going to have a really difficult job turning that around when you can't play the game on your terms. You needed to score that first goal. That's the penalty you pay for not winning your home leg. And so, yeah, you can talk about the injuries. Okay, is it a different game if Mbappe plays the first leg from start to finish at full health? Maybe. He turned the game around when he came in. It didn't ultimately lead to anything because they didn't score. And he was nowhere near as good in this leg. And yes, of course, you've lost now lost Neymar for the season. Neymar's not changing this game. The issues PSG have nothing to do with that front three. You look at the midfield in this game, and I was somebody who at least gave him credit, both from the coaching hire and from the signings they made this offseason. At least they tried something different. You got to give them that much. They signed some not so flashy names, particularly in the midfield, which has been an area of weakness. And they hired a coach who has done a terrific job with the teams he's managed and has never done something like this before. You can say that's a bad idea, but they also haven't had the success they want with the guys who know how to manage those kind of players. They fired them too, so why not try something different instead of just banging your head against the wall trying the same thing over and over, because it's not going to work. Which makes the way that this played out that much more concerning and infuriating if you're a PSG fan. Because you have no reason to believe anything changes next season. One of the reasons why is look at the substitutes that came into this game. And I know injuries played a part here. I get that. PSG brought on two 17-year-olds and a 20-year-old. Bayern brought on João Cancelo, Sané, Mane, and Serge Gnabry were four of the subs, if I remember correctly. Especially with, an Mbappe who gets injured from time to time, a Neymar who seems to get injured every season, an aging Messi. You just aren't beating the Bayerns, the cities of the world, without depth. And part of the reason they don't have depth is they've jettisoned all of those players who you would expect to come on in games like this because of the money they're spending on that front three. And the fact that financial fair play is sort of a thing. And you go look at all that money that they spent two summers ago, Donnarumma, Hakimi, Messi, etc. They can't just continue to add that to what they're already paying. Now, maybe you argue they can and nobody cares. I'm not getting into a financial fair play conversation right now. My point is, this is the route they chose. And last season you can say, okay, they were figuring it out. Messi wasn't himself. Give him another go. Again, I give him credit for trying something different. And the end result was the same. Which now leads to the really big questions. Things like, what reason does Messi have to stay and try this? What reason does Messi have to stay and try this again next season? There is no reason to believe it's going to be any different. What does he have to play for or prove? He's got his World Cup. It's not like he's walking into next season feeling really good about his chances to win another Champions League, because that would change the conversation. He's not staying for a League One title. He's not staying to win the Coupe de France, the only trophy he's ever played for and not won. One of the biggest winners here is Inter Miami, especially with the way they've started this season. Now, it's 2 home games. I'm not going to get too excited about it. But they've got something going there. I just don't... I don't know how, if you're Messi, you can rationalize running this back again. Unless you just want to keep playing at the highest level. And Barcelona doesn't have the money, which is very possible. That's the only way that I can look at this and say that makes sense as to why he stays. But you are not staying for any kind of competitive reason. Outside of just simply playing at a high level and getting to play in the Champions League. And do you want to continue to deal with the Neymar drama? Do you want to continue to be on Kylian Mbappe's team? Sergio Ramos and Messi were both out there. And you know who was wearing the captain's armband? Mbappe. Do you want to continue to be part of all of that? That just seems anti-Messi to me. It was definitely worth giving it another go. 100%. And Messi got his benefit out of this season. He looked much more like himself. He was really good heading into the World Cup. Obviously, the World Cup went exactly as he had hoped. There was a benefit to playing on this team leading into the World Cup. 100%. That part all worked out. But now you get to the, okay, so what's next? What else is there to do? The answer would be win a Champions League. And I just don't see it happening. And from a PSG standpoint, you have to give Mbappe everything he wants. You have to keep him at all costs. Look at the difference now, not in this game. This game was not a great example. But just over the past month or so, the difference between when he's on the field and when he's not. He is not just that good, he is that valuable and that important. So you've got to lock that money up. But other than that, you've got to find ways to spend to improve the rest of this roster. Particularly in the midfield. Because you look at the other top teams in the world, and where is your difference-making midfielder? Is that supposed to be Verratti? You don't have a Musiala. You don't have a De Bruyne, a Rodri. You don't have, Kroos, Modric. Trying to think of other. You don't have the Odegaard Party duo if you want to throw Arsenal in there. You don't have what Napoli's midfield is producing. You don't have that guy. You got to find that guy, and you got to rebuild this bench so that you actually have, 15, 16, 17 starters. There is so much work that has to be done. On top of the fact that this was probably never, ever going to work because you just don't have a team that's built to do the things you need to win a Champions League. And then the other part of this is Neymar. If Chelsea are actually interested in paying any kind of real money for Neymar's services, you have got to make that happen as quickly as you possibly can. Don't haggle over an extra $5 million. Get that done. One, because if Chelsea is willing to spend the money, they're probably actually going to give you good value. Todd Boehly doesn't seem to be interested in making sort of cutthroat deals and bargaining for every last dollar, the way, Daniel Levy has a reputation of doing. He just made Enzo Fernandez the highest paid player in the history of the Premier League, or most expensive transfer. Again, Enzo Fernandez wasn't playing in Europe. What, this time last year? If I've got the timeline right? You got, if that interest is legitimate, that solves a lot of your problems for PSG. Then you can reallocate that money. I also think this team is just better with one or two of these three than all three of them together. It's kind of the Brooklyn Nets situation of you just can't maximize all these players at the same time. Messi doesn't run. Mbappe's greatest gift is his pace. Neymar is a one-on-one technical player. You can kind of make it work. You can play well with all three of them. It will look great at times, but you are not maximizing them. Because it's impossible, because their skills don't complement each other perfectly. So if you can just kind of, to me, if you are PSG and you are serious about winning a Champions League, and not just spending all kinds of money and trying to protect your image, you got to rebuild this thing from scratch around Mbappe. You got to go find a new midfield. You got to somehow dismantle this front three. Hopefully Messi just kind of helps you do that. And it's not that they're necessarily better off without Messi. The one that I think they'd be better off without is Neymar. But you might just not be able to get rid of Neymar. Messi might just be ready to move on, and at least you get that salary off the books and you can go do some other things with it. But ultimately, that's kind of where I'm at with this. You're doing the same thing over and over again. It wasn't working. You tried to tweak it within the parameters of what you've already committed to. And again, I give PSG credit for that. And you're back at the exact same spot. You can't trust Neymar to be healthy, even if you do believe in him. You can't trust Messi to be a difference maker every single game. He wasn't very impactful in this one. And your future is tied to Mbappe. Right or wrong, that's the choice you made. And it's, at the very least, justifiable. But this, what you have right now, is not good enough. And Neymar's only going to get a year older, and Messi's only going to get a year older, and you're only wasting another great year of Mbappe trying to do this again and failing again. The quicker you can get out of this, the better. That's the point we are at. Your other game here, AC Milan 0, Tottenham 0. AC Milan go through 1-0 on aggregate. So, of course, right after all that PSG discussion, now we got to have a conversation about Spurs' future. Before I get into that, though, I want to begin by giving AC Milan their credit and going back to something I've talked about before, which is at some point Serie A needed to show up in the Champions League. Because the Inter, particularly the two Milan clubs, win Serie A and then just kind of exit without making a real splash in the Champions League. You weren't seeing any deep runs outside of, the one Roma had that was a Cinderella story. And, of course, you had Juventus, but Juventus is not Juventus at this point. And are facing an uncertain future with the sanctions and all that. The best teams in your league need to show up in this competition. Inter are in a good spot. AC Milan are now through. And Napoli are doing Napoli things. This is terrific for Serie A. This was the season that needed to happen, and you've got the teams that needed to deliver delivering. And it's not like Inter and AC Milan have been great this season. They have been up and down, inconsistent, bad losses. I would argue neither of them are one of the 8 best teams in the world. But here they are, into or knocking on the door of the Champions League quarterfinals. On the Spurs side, this 3-game stretch. You put out a rotated squad in the FA Cup, the trophy you have the best chance of winning, to keep your guys rested for that Wolves game and for this game. You don't score in any of them. You get knocked out of both competitions. And now, I was just kind of curious, so I've looked. Take it with a grain of salt, but 538 is giving them a 26% chance of making the Champions League. Because not only are Liverpool right there, Brighton have a bunch of games in hand, Newcastle are right there too. You're competing with 4 teams at least. 3 teams. You're in a 4-team race for that 4th spot. And there's not a lot of reason to feel confident about Tottenham right now. That's the overlying kind of context of all of this. Is something had to go your way. If you're going to sacrifice the FA Cup, fine. I disagree, particularly in the case of Spurs. And they did, if somebody deserved to win that game, it was them, to be fair. But then you go lay an egg in the league, open this thing wide open in terms of open it back up in terms of the race for top 4. And then you got this game where, again, you don't create all that much. You got a chance here or there. But AC Milan were very comfortable for the most part. And then Christian Romero does what Christian Romero does and gets himself sent off for a needless second yellow that maybe could have been a red by itself. I am always very hesitant with players like Christian Romero. And I also understand that having that edge is a benefit. But that edge is only a benefit if it's a once every season or every month or so it comes out and costs you. You can be worried about it as long as it doesn't actually turn into a problem most of the time. Christian Romero's track record recently, it's a problem almost every single game. You simply can't take that yellow in that case, in that situation. And we got comments coming in. It's the history of the Tottenham. I mean, it's just hard to see this going any other way at this point because this is the identity that and the culture of this club. And that was why I was so high on the Antonio Conte signing to get to him in that part of this. I really believed he was somebody who could come in and change this. And obviously I was wrong. It's also why I thought Manchester United should have hired him. Obviously I was wrong about that too. Because now what you have is a team playing an unattractive style, not being particularly good at it, and you have attached your identity as a club to managers who play this way, have big names, and haven't backed it up for your club. Now, okay, you take Nuno out of the big name part, but, right, Mourinho, Nuno, and Conte. That is not who Spurs are supposed to be. You have swung and missed on this, bring in the winner who knows how to get it done twice now. Obviously, Antonio Conte has no problem walking away from things. And if I'm Daniel Levy, if I'm Spurs, I'm not begging him to stay. It just hasn't worked. You have got to get back to who you are. Antonio Conte will not do that. The only way that this is all worth it is if it's working, if you're having success, and if it's getting you that trophy you so desperately crave. And none of that is happening right now. They're not any closer to winning a trophy. The closest they've come to winning a trophy? Well, okay, Mourinho came close, so I guess this isn't entirely accurate, but there is a guy out there who actually fits the identity of this club, who can take... I've talked about, a while back I did a kind of a state of the Big Six thing and said the right thing to do is to sell Harry Kane and start over because your ceiling just isn't high enough. I don't think they're going to do that. But if that actually happens, or if you're trying to whether it's selling Son or I don't know, if you're going to hit the reset button here, who better to lead that rebuild or reset, whatever you want to call it, than Pochettino? Outside of his previous history with the club, but just on it in terms of what he does best. He is not built to handle a club like PSG and to handle those superstars. He's built to get the most out of individual players. That's what he did so well at Spurs. That's what Spurs need, because this team is not reaching its potential. I still believe in this squad. I just don't believe in the manager's ability to maximize it. And I'm a Conte guy. It's not that I don't think Conte is a good manager. Conte is just not a good fit for this team. And that's okay. But I just don't see the rationale for keeping him, especially when Mauricio Pochettino is sitting there for you. Play out the season, hope he can get you into the top four again, although I'm not holding my breath, and then let Poch take it from there. If I'm Spurs, that's what I'm doing. All right, I'm going to take my first break. When we come back, the other two games from Tuesday, Chelsea getting past Borussia Dortmund and Benfica destroying Club Brugge. I will talk about all of that. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you, William, for the comment. I just went and looked at Fabrizio Romano's tweet. Unsurprisingly, apparently, Richarlison made it very clear after the game he is displeased with his current role at Spurs as the $60 million signing or whatever it was that doesn't get to start. So there's that as well. Just going and further verifying everything that I just said, that it's time for Spurs to hit the reset button and figure out what the next era is going to look like, because you need a brand new start. Okay, our other games from Tuesday: Chelsea beat Borussia Dortmund 2-0 to win 2-1 on aggregate. They probably should have finished this thing off in the first leg. They were fantastic, except for they couldn't put the ball in the net because it was bad Chelsea. And Karim Adeyemi scores, so Dortmund entered with this 1-0 lead. Coming back to Stamford Bridge, Adeyemi is injured, so he can't play in this game. Yes, that was a factor, especially as you knew that Chelsea were going to have to push for goals entering this game down on aggregate. Adeyemi's pace and ability to stretch the field would have been very helpful for Dortmund. That's not the reason Dortmund lost this game, though. Chelsea dominated again. There is no doubt who deserved to go through over the two legs. The right team advanced. And, it goes from bad to worse for Dortmund. Julian Brandt gets forced off with an injury 5 minutes in. On comes Gio Reyna. Although it does look for a little while like Chelsea are going to do Chelsea things again. They waste some opportunities. Havertz hits the post. Then he misses the penalty, but he scores the retake. I'm not going to get into that whole debate. They deserved this win. They deserved to win by multiple goals. They deserved to advance. Dortmund had a couple chances late, though, because Chelsea still didn't finish this off. But ultimately, they do survive. They advance. A massive stretch here for Graham Potter. All of a sudden, the ball went in the net once, and now it's gone in 3 times in 2 games. And they're into the Champions League quarterfinals and feeling much better about themselves. It's amazing what execution will do. Because I will keep going back to this. I don't know what Graham Potter is supposed to do other than put his team in a position to succeed and set up a situation in which his team creates chances. And there were times where that wasn't happening, but recently they have had no issue with that whatsoever. When he's come under more criticism, I would almost argue he's been doing an even better job. They just aren't finishing because they have a team built with a bunch of players who aren't finishers. But they get the goal over the weekend. They get the 2 goals here. They played well again, just like they played well in the first leg. The difference was they took their chances. And so they become a very interesting entrant into the quarterfinals here, because they could beat anybody. On the right day, they are incredibly dangerous. And obviously, they just made Dortmund look rather silly, and Dortmund hadn't had a result other than a win in all of 2023 before this game. That's what Chelsea can do. Chelsea also consistently are dropping points in the Premier League against mid-table, lower-table teams. So it's a very strange thing where you have to be scared of their... No team has a bigger gap. This is the way I'll put it. No team has a bigger gap between their ceiling and their floor than Chelsea. Could Chelsea win this? Sure. Could Chelsea look really bad in the quarterfinals and get, an unfortunate draw and lose 4-0 on aggregate? Sure. None of it would surprise you. But I am happy for Graham Potter that he's gotten this thing turned around, at least temporarily, because you threw all these players at him. He's doing a good job with them. They're not delivering on their end. And yet we still continue to point to the manager with that, because the manager, the coach, is the person that you can change. You can't change all the money you just spent on all these guys. And that will always be just one of the issues I have. But They get the win, and on the Dortmund side of this, they simply weren't good enough. That's the first thing. But second, if I'm a Dortmund fan, if I'm Edin Terzic, I'm not that disappointed with this. Odds are you weren't winning. Could they have? Sure. They gave Manchester City some trouble. Again, on their day, they can play with anybody. But if you ask me, would I rather be completely focused on this Bundesliga title race or, squeaking through past Chelsea to get to the quarterfinals when it doesn't look like there's going to be any give-me's in the quarters, right? If you were to say, okay, you could possibly draw Club Brugge and get yourself into the semis pretty easily, then that's a little bit of a different conversation. But that's not the case. I'll take the extra rest, the laser focus, knowing you still have to go to Bayern, and knowing that you are delivering week to week here. They just got past Leipzig. That might be the second toughest game they had left. And they won. Wasn't pretty. They were great in the first half, not very good in the second. But they got it done. And so it's the opposite of trying to salvage your season through European competition or a cup competition. If it keeps going, great. But you got bigger things to worry about. They can absolutely go win this Bundesliga. They're going to have to get a point at Bayern to do it, I think. But that's not out of the question. So now you get all of your focus there. I just don't think it's the biggest thing in the world. You would have loved to have Adeyemi. Maybe that changes things a little bit. I'm a huge fan of his. But and the other part too is they're a little bit banged up right now. Brandt left. He was the guy that was scoring every single Bundesliga game for him. Adeyemi's been spectacular as well when he's been healthy. If you can just try and mitigate some of those things by not having those extra games, by getting that extra recovery time, get those guys healthy for these massive games coming up the rest of the season in the Bundesliga. A disappointing exit in the round of 16 is a more than fair price to play. They'll be back next season. They've got a really good core. That defense is much better. It's just not the end of the world for Dortmund. Chelsea needed this. Dortmund, bigger things to worry about. And then finally, Benfica, take care of business. 5-1 on the night, 7-1 on aggregate. Club Brugge have just had one of the most bizarre seasons. If you go back and look at what's been happening domestically and the teams that they lose to and the teams they beat in the Champions League, and very strange. They are no match for Benfica. Benfica continue to justify my confidence in them. I mean, before they even started scoring goals, they nearly had a couple. The one notable thing here, Nicolas Otamendi is going to be suspended for the first leg of the quarters. That is the one downside to this game. He picks up the yellow, so he's going to be suspended. But if I'm Benfica at this point, and I know I just said that, if you're Dortmund, there's no gimmies in the quarterfinals. But if I'm Benfica, and I'm looking at some of the teams that have already advanced, Chelsea don't scare me. I know Chelsea can be really good. Chelsea don't scare me. AC Milan don't scare me. Okay, Bayern scare me. I don't want Bayern. My point just simply being, and maybe Porto gets through, maybe Leipzig gets through. There are absolutely matchups, multiple, that Benfica can get in the quarterfinals that I feel good about, if not, would view Benfica as the favorite. And then you're in the semis. And who knows what happens. And then, if it goes your way, you're in the final. there is a pathway here. This team is good enough. Do I think they're going to do it? No. But I just want to make sure this conversation is about Benfica as a contender, not Benfica as a Cinderella. Because that is just flat out disrespectful to what they've done this season. I've talked about this before, but I'll briefly say it again. It's not just that they're taking care of business domestically. It's that they are checking the box, just like Napoli are doing, at every point along the road, both domestically and in Europe. You can say, okay, they haven't played that, couple good teams in Portugal, but they haven't played that many great domestic games. What happens when they come up against better competition? Drew PSG twice. Didn't look out of place at all. Again, topped that Champions League group. Now, got a favorable draw in the round of 16, but what'd they do with it? Thumped Club Brugge. And Scott Parker is now out at Club Brugge. Should mention that as well. Difficult stretch here for him, going back to the beginning of this season. Now fired again. I don't really have too much to say on that. I just wanted to kind of recognize it. I don't know what it had to be an optics thing of getting beat this badly, because the idea that his team went out to Benfica that's not on him. That's on his team. His name was nearly as good as Benfica. Now, the way it happened, not great. So I get that when it comes to the decision that was made by Club Brugge. But again, right, this isn't kind of finding a way, getting over the line. They have been dominant and done just about everything you could possibly want them to against every level of competition, with an exception here or there because things happen sometimes. It's not like they haven't translated it to the Champions League. It's not like they've only been able to beat the other sort of quote-unquote smaller teams in the Champions League. They have shown up every step of the way, which is why I'm so confident in their ability to compete with whoever they draw in the quarters. Now, do I like their chances against, Manchester City, Bayern? No. I would even feel okay about their chances against Real Madrid. Wouldn't love them, but I'd be okay with it. This team is that good. I will keep going to bat for them. They showed it again in this game. Okay, I'm going to take another break. When I come back, weekend look ahead as always, breaking down the biggest matchups across Europe and here in the U.S. this weekend. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one more time to the Touchline Talk Show. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And it is time for the weekend look ahead. Starting in England, there are a lot of games I want to talk about briefly here. I'm going to try and go through them pretty quickly, but it's a very interesting weekend with a lot of, top of the table versus bottom of the table or stuff like that. So, start with Liverpool at Bournemouth. All of a sudden, here are Liverpool back in the thick of this top four race, probably top four favorites. You got to go to Bournemouth. Can be a tricky situation. And again, how do Liverpool respond from this historic win over United? Because they've done this thing a couple times where they start looking really good again, and then it kind of all comes crumbling down. Can you build off of this? That's a game you should win, but also a game that is tricky. So that's a really good test for Liverpool to kind of see just how real this two-game resurgence is. Then you got Brighton at Leeds on Saturday. Again, Brighton still in that top four race. Leeds trying to avoid relegation, so that's one of those top-of-the-table, bottom-of-the-table games I was talking about. Nottingham Forest at Tottenham. on Saturday. Forest still kind of in that relegation race. Certainly can use some more points to feel better. And Spurs. Really, I wanted to mention this game to talk about this from a Spurs perspective. There's a stretch here. I believe it's Forest, Everton, and Southampton, not in that order. I think it's Southampton and then Everton, if I remember correctly. But Spurs are playing three of the worst teams in the Premier League in their next three games. And then you have a stretch that I believe is some combination of Fulham, Newcastle, United, Brighton, and Bournemouth. I think is the next five. This is going to... You're approaching a gauntlet if you are Spurs. You have got to take care of business in these next three games. These three games are going to go a long way toward determining how the rest of the season goes. If they pick up 7-9 points from them, you start to feel a little bit better heading into that really difficult stretch. If you've got, a loss, a draw in there, if they lose at home to Forest after just exiting the FA Cup and just losing to Wolves and just exiting the Champions League, you can pretty much just say goodbye to top four. These three games are massive for Spurs, so that's why I wanted to highlight that one in particular. Also, Manchester City at Crystal Palace on Saturday. Always one of those games Manchester City seems to struggle with for some reason. Can't afford to slip up with Arsenal continuing to look good. So there's that one as well. And then Sunday, speaking of Arsenal at Fulham. Difficult game. Fulham having a great season. Really looking forward to this one. This is kind of that next step for Arsenal. Okay, you had the amazing comeback against Bournemouth. You got to be better against Fulham. This is a game where absolutely Arsenal can drop points. It's another one also where if you win, it's not just that you've eliminated an opportunity to drop points off of your schedule by completing another game and getting closer to the finish line. It's also, this is one of the more difficult games left. So if Arsenal can get this one, they are taking another big step toward actually winning this Premier League title. And then finally, Southampton at Manchester United on Sunday. Obviously, top four implications, relegation implications. And how do Manchester United respond from getting thumped 7-0? I still believe it's going to be a bump in the road and not kind of the dismantling of everything the season has been. But we'll have to see what happens. Southampton poses an intriguing test. Then in Spain, you've got Espanyol at Real Madrid on Saturday, Barcelona at Athletic Bilbao on Sunday, Real Betis at Villarreal on Sunday. That is 5 versus 6 and kind of those European spots and the battle for those. Italy, once again, just kind of running through all of the top four hopefuls that have games. Inter Milan at Spezia Calcio on Friday, Atalanta at Napoli on Saturday. How did Napoli bounce back from that Lazio game? Lazio at Bologna on Saturday, Roma at Sassuolo on Sunday, and Juventus at Sampdoria on Sunday. Juve still hanging around. I believe the gap is 7 points. They're 7 points out of a European competition, the Conference League, that 6th spot right now. Can't afford to let it get much larger than that. But you were in a position a week ago where it looked like this might actually happen. Now not so much. Certainly can't avoid to drop more points this weekend. In Germany, Augsburg at Bayern Munich on Saturday. Dortmund at Schalke on Saturday. Always going to be an inherently tricky game because of the rivalry. Obviously, it's a derby, all of that stuff. Dortmund should also beat the worst team in the Bundesliga. But that's just... It's kind of like those Liverpool-Everton games when Liverpool were battling City. You just never feel good about them until they're actually over because you just never know with rivalry games. And then Borussia Mönchengladbach at Red Bull Leipzig on Saturday. Union Berlin at Wolfsburg on Sunday. So all kinds of really good matchups in the Bundesliga this weekend. In France, PSG at Brest. Lens at Clermont. Stade de Reims at Monaco. Strasbourg at Marseille. Those are your top four teams and their matchups for this weekend. And then Major League soccer. My favorite matchups of the weekend: Seattle at Cincinnati. That's on Saturday. Can the Sounders keep this up? First good test for Cincinnati to see if they're serious about being Supporter Shield contenders. You've got Columbus at Toronto on Saturday. I'm all in on this Columbus team. I was also on this Toronto team. I am very concerned by what I've seen so far. That's just going to be a really interesting data point for both those teams. LA Galaxy at Sporting Kansas City on Saturday. Really looking forward to that one. Let's see what the Galaxy have got. Obviously, they only got the one game under their belt because of the postponement. And Kansas City, off to a bit of a slow start. I'm really high on this team as well. Can they bounce back? St. Louis at Portland, also on Saturday. That's a good Portland team playing in a really difficult place to visit. Can St. Louis keep this going? That's not a game you should have any expectations of getting points from. So you can't really lose anything here unless they get thumped, 5-0 or something. I don't see that happening. So really, you're playing with house money. Can they get a point? Can they somehow beat Portland and Austin on the road in the first 3 weeks of being a Major League Soccer franchise? And then the other game that I'm really intrigued by, New England at LAFC on Sunday. That's your Sunday game. Revolution quietly are off to a really, really good start. They have been really, really good defensively. They kind of fell off the map last season. And, they had these DPs coming in and out. You were trying to get guys acclimated. You made the goalkeeping change. There was a lot going on. That team still has a lot of talent. That core from the Supporter Shield team that was the best regular season team in MLS history is still there. That's still Bruce Arena. That's still arguably the best pair of outside backs in the league. That's arguably the best goalkeeper in the league. They are better than people are giving them credit for. I want to know just how good they are, because I am really close to jumping on board with this. I didn't even have them in my top 5. I probably had them 6 or 7 in the East, maybe even 8. This is going to be a really, really good test. What do they look like in Bank of California Stadium against the defending MLS Cup champions? So that is what I am looking forward to this weekend across the world, as well as here at home in the United States. And that is all for the show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.